Hello, my name is Amelia Fontenal. I'm a curator at the RIT Cary Graphic Arts Collection, a rare book library that specializes in the history of printing. Today I'd like to show you some artifacts published by a printer who helped to shape the early American Republic. Isaiah Thomas lived from 1749 to 1831. He was a self-made man, apprenticed in printing at the age of 7, and he continued to work in the journalism and book trades for over 40 years. It is a range of his publications that make a valuable sample of early American printing in the Cary collection. Thomas worked for most of his long career in Massachusetts. His lifetime contribution as a publisher of almost 400 printed works has left a lasting influence on the beginning of the American publishing industry. In late life, he established early historic preservation in our country by founding the American Antiquarian Society. After his retirement from active publishing in 1802, Thomas spent 8 years documenting the early printing in the colonies and the new republic. And now any student of the printed word in the United States must start with Thomas's comprehensive 2-volume book, The History of Printing in America. It was complete with a biography of printers, many of whom Thomas personally knew. But what was printing in the late 18th and early 19th centuries? A letter, the most basic component of a word, had to be individually designed, cut into a punch, and then driven into a bar of metal to make a mold. This recessed matrix would be fitted into a handheld adjustable mold, making a precise cavity, then filled with an alloy of molten lead. The resulting cooled and hand-cast iron sort would then have to be sized and dressed to exacting dimensions to form a finished piece of metal type. Repeat this process for all of the upper and lowercase characters in the alphabet, plus numbers and punctuations in various point sizes, and you can quickly appreciate the value of a printer's stock of metal fonts. Adding illustrations to a printed text was no less time-consuming. Relief printing processes called for carefully carved woodcuts or engravings, where artisans used sharp chisels to gouge out an image's negative space, all executed in reverse from its final printed orientation. As an apprentice, Isaiah Thomas became an average wood engraver, making cuts for his master, Zechariah Fowle's Boston shop. Now for the actual printing. The paragraphs of a page would be assembled with hundreds of pieces of metal type, sometimes accompanied by a wood-engraved picture block. These pieces would be locked up into a hand press, ink by hand, printed hundreds of times, and then left to dry until binding. New pages required redistribution of all those types back into their cases, followed by another round of hand composition of each sentence, letter by metal letter. The final step in this process was distribution. During his career, Isaiah Thomas established 8 print shops with bookseller storefronts, first in New England and then as far south as Baltimore and to the west in Albany. Like many of his contemporaries, Thomas would sell his books unbound in folded paper gatherings, simply stitched up the spine or later as finished hardcover books. But well before he established his multi-city publishing enterprise, in 1775 Isaiah Thomas set up his print shop in the town of Worcester, some 40 miles west of Boston. It was a modest press, but the ideas issued from it were grand. His Massachusetts Spy newspaper promoted the American Revolution's cause with its articles describing the injustices against the colonies and news from the battlefield. His delivery riders even served double duty as intelligence couriers for the Patriots. Looking back at the Spy, we are impressed with its progressive journalistic courage in difficult times. here shown through an excerpt that embraces the early abolition of slavery. Thomas continued publishing the Massachusetts Spy until 1802, and then he passed it on to successors. In all, the newspaper successfully weathered the turbulence of the newly formed nation. After the Revolution, Isaiah Thomas issued the works that were in demand in his time: Bibles, primers, and almanacs. It has been said that the Bible took care of the hereafter, but the almanac took care of the here. As such, almanacs are of special interest to historians, as they offer insight on so many levels of secular life. Their dog-eared pages offer valuable information about agriculture, economics, society, and the health of their readers. Thomas published his almanacs almost yearly from 1775 until 1803, after which his son and others produced almanacs in his name until 1819. The Thomas almanacs held in the Cary collection are small pamphlets, about the size of a paperback. Their cheapness would have put them in the hands of the poorest of readers, and Thomas is said to have reprinted each edition 2 or 3 times to keep up with demand. These almanacs have amazingly survived years of use because of just that, their usefulness. The Isaiah Thomas almanacs are filled with such diverse entries as astronomical tables, weather forecasts, milestone dates, and even excerpts from lectures. This information was useful to farmers for crop planning, to housewives who were educating their own children, and to the whole family for entertainment. Almanacs became people's diaries, with notes recording the sale of a meadow or the birth of a child. They gave passages explaining the mysteries of the human body. This wood engraving of the Man of Signs shows how attributes of the zodiac and constellations supposedly influenced anatomical functions. And any person afflicted with sickness will try any remedy once, even folksy treatments like tobacco smoke for earaches or an onion poultice for chilblain sores, as recommended in Thomas's Almanac of 1784. Civic awareness was part of every citizen's duty, and as such, Thomas published the important and newly penned laws in his almanacs. Here we see the proceedings of the Federal Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia, which would become the United States Constitution. As Isaiah Thomas's prosperity grew, and his competition surely too, his printing became more ambitious in adding illustrations. The 1789 almanac was his first. Here we see Thomas's almanac for May 1789, showing a lady with a finch. By today's standards, the illustration is coarse, but here is what this illustration might look like if it were printed with modern technology. And here's the same image as it might look when viewed on the small screen of a handheld device. And as a genre today, the modern almanac lives on, most notably in Robert Thomas's Old Farmer's Almanac, which was first established in 1792 as a fierce competitor to Isaiah's almanacs. And we all know that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Well, perhaps in terms of almanac layouts. But Isaiah Thomas was also savvy in diversifying his catalog of publications, from the bread and butter of almanacs and newspapers to elaborate editions of the Bible, historic tracts, sermons, and speeches. He was a businessman who could successfully ply his printing trade over a variety of subjects. Later, Isaiah Thomas took on more ambitious press work, like the first folio Bible to be published in the United States. This Bible is expensively illustrated with copperplate engravings. As a book, it is a substantial tome, about 16 inches tall and a few inches thick, appropriate for reading on a lectern. At the same time as the folio Bible's production, Thomas printed another Bible edition in a smaller quarto format, entirely at his own expense. His editorial note proclaims that no cost, care, or layout hath he spared to render these editions correct, neat, and elegant. And he goes on to urge the reader to compare this edition with Bibles produced in Europe and make the choice to, essentially, buy American. And he did just that. Thomas sold American editions of popular European texts like John Mason's Self-Knowledge, which appealed to very American principles, as in this quote from its preface: "The great end of all philosophy, both natural and moral, is to know ourselves and to know God. The highest learning is to be wise, and the greatest wisdom is to be good." And of course, he distributed texts that celebrated American independence, such as this July 4th discourse where Reverend Bangs proclaims, "The love of liberty is as universal as the love of life." But perhaps equaling his accomplishments in publishing, Isaiah Thomas was a benefactor to the town of Worcester, never failing in his social duties as a resident there. In 1812, he founded the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester and donated his personal library for the basis of its collection. He also funded the Society's first building there, matching his monetary contributions with extraordinary attention and personal care to make it a success. His grandson wrote, "Thomas's observation and experience had shown him how quickly the sources of our history were drying up, how rapidly the monuments of the past were crumbling and wasting away. He saw and understood, no man better, that the only safe rule was to gather up all the fragments, that nothing be lost." What a prescient view of our country's historic record. In 1827, Isaiah Thomas wrote in a letter, "To adopt a typographical phrase, my font is nearly worn out." And he went on to say in that letter, "The art of printing must be acknowledged to be among the most important of human discoveries and has done more than any other to ameliorate the condition of the human family. Long may it be preserved and permitted to aid in the advancement of knowledge, the dissemination of virtue, and the diffusion and protection of the principles of civil and religious liberty." He died in 1831 at the age of 82. And it's through Thomas's printed documents that his industrious and patriotic spirit stays alive, especially here at the RIT Cary Collection, where patrons are always welcome.